The envelope sat on my kitchen counter like a loaded weapon. Cream-colored paper, my name written in Rachel's careful handwriting across the front. Inside, divorce papers I'd been expecting for 3 months, ever since the night she laughed at me and said those words that still echo in my head. "You'll never find better than me, Marcus. Look at yourself." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The thing about being 43 and hearing your wife of 15 years dismiss you like yesterday's newspaper is that it crystallizes something you've been avoiding. I stood in our suburban Phoenix kitchen, the one with granite countertops we'd argued over at 3 different showrooms, and realized I'd been living like a guest in my own life. The morning light filtered through blinds we'd hung together during our first year in the house, back when we still touched each other without thinking about it. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've spent the last decade and a half building a software consulting business from a spare bedroom into something that employs 12 people and pays for a mortgage on a house I rarely enjoyed. I'm the kind of man who fixes the garbage disposal on Saturday mornings, remembers to change the air filters, and still opens doors for strangers. My father taught me that respect is earned through consistency, not volume. Rachel used to appreciate that about me. Used to. The papers felt heavier than they should have. Legal weight, I suppose. Irreconcilable differences, the standard language that makes the death of a marriage sound like a scheduling conflict. I set them next to the coffee maker, the same spot where she used to leave grocery lists and reminders about parent-teacher conferences for our son Tyler, who's now 16 and splits his time pretending we don't exist. 3 months earlier, I'd come home from a client meeting in Scottsdale to find Rachel on the living room sofa with her laptop, typing furiously. The TV played some reality show where people screamed at each other about renovations. She didn't look up when I walked in, didn't acknowledge the sound of my keys hitting the ceramic dish by the front door. I'd learned to read her moods through peripheral signals, the set of her shoulders, the way she held her mouth when concentrating, the particular rhythm of her fingers on the keyboard when she was angry about something. I stood there for a moment, loosening my tie, waiting for some small recognition that I'd returned home. When it didn't come, I made the mistake of trying to connect. "How was your day?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. She sighed without looking up, the kind of sigh that carries 15 years of accumulated irritation. "Fine," she said, still typing. The word landed flat as a stone. I tried again. "Tyler get to practice okay?" This was our new language. Grunts, abbreviations, the verbal equivalent of a shrug. I watched her face in the glow of her screen, searching for the woman who used to turn toward me when I walked into a room. She'd been beautiful when we met, still was in that careful way that required maintenance and monthly appointments I wasn't supposed to notice paying for. But somewhere in the transition from young love to mortgage payments, her smile had become something she wore for other people. "I was thinking we could try that new restaurant on Mill Avenue this weekend," I said, making one more attempt to bridge whatever gap had opened between us. That's when she finally looked up. Her expression wasn't anger exactly, more like the face you make when someone interrupts a movie you're actually enjoying. "Marcus," she said, and my name sounded like a chore. "Can you just not right now?" I sat back in the chair, feeling something shift in my chest. The air conditioning hummed through the vents, filling the space where a response should have been. On the TV, someone was crying about crown molding. I counted the seconds between her keystrokes, marking time like a man waiting for test results. "I'm going to grab a shower," I said finally. "Okay," she replied, already back to her screen. Under the hot water, I stood with my palms against the tile wall and let the steam fog the mirror. At 43, I could still see the outline of the man who used to run 5 miles every morning, who played college basketball before settling into a career that required more sitting than moving. My hair had started going gray at the temples, but Rachel used to say it made me look distinguished. When was the last time she'd said anything about how I looked? I thought about marriages I'd watched dissolve among friends and colleagues. Usually there was a catalyst, an affair, a job loss, some dramatic shift that everyone could point to later and say, that's when it started falling apart. But our dissolution felt more like erosion, water wearing away stone so gradually you don't notice until the foundation cracks. The shower ran cold before I moved. Rachel was in bed when I came out, reading on her tablet with the lamp on her side, casting a warm circle of light that didn't quite reach my half of the mattress. I slipped under the covers, careful not to disturb the careful arrangement of pillows she'd built between us. Not a wall exactly, just a soft boundary that had become permanent. Rachel, I said quietly. I'm reading, I know. Are we okay? She set the tablet on her chest and looked at the ceiling. In profile, she could have been the same woman I'd married, before the lines around her eyes deepened and her mouth learned to hold disappointment. We're fine, Marcus. Fine. The most dangerous word in a marriage. It's what people say when they've stopped expecting better but aren't ready to admit worse. It doesn't feel fine, I said. She turned toward me then, and for a moment I thought we might have an actual conversation. Instead, she gave me the look I'd seen her give Tyler when he asked for something unreasonable. Patient, tired, done. What do you want me to say? That I'm thrilled with our exciting Tuesday night routine. That I'm looking forward to another weekend where you tinker with your car while I handle everything else. Her voice carried the weight of grievances I didn't know she'd been collecting. This is what marriage looks like after 15 years, Marcus. Adjust your expectations. I wanted to argue, to list all the ways I'd been present and engaged, but the words felt hollow before I could speak them. How do you defend against accusations that might be true? I'm trying, I said instead. Are you? She picked up her tablet again. Because from where I'm sitting, you've been on autopilot for years. The conversation ended there. Not with resolution but with the quiet violence of two people turning away from each other. I lay awake listening to her breathe, counting the inches between us like a surveyor mapping impossible The real breaking point came 2 weeks later. Tyler had a game, JV basketball at Mountain View High School. I'd cleared my schedule, something I'd been doing more consistently after Rachel's accusations about autopilot. The gym smelled like floor wax and teenage sweat, filled with parents who cheered too loudly and complained about referees. I found a spot in the bleachers and saved a seat beside me, checking my phone every few minutes for Rachel's arrival. She didn't come. Tyler played well, scored 12 points and pulled down 6 rebounds. I cheered from the stands like any proud father, but my attention kept drifting to the empty seat beside me. Other parents sat in couples, sharing popcorn and commentary. I felt conspicuous in my solitude, like wearing the wrong clothes to a party. After the game, Tyler found me in the parking lot, his hair still damp from the shower. At 16, he had my height but his mother's sharp features. Girls at school probably found him handsome, though he was too focused on sports to notice. Good game, I said, offering the kind of fist bump we'd been doing since he was 10. Thanks. Where's Mom? She had something she couldn't reschedule. The lie came easy, protecting her even when she hadn't protected me. He nodded, accepting this as normal. When had Tyler stopped expecting both his parents to show up? When had we trained him to expect disappointment? We drove home in comfortable quiet, the radio playing songs from my college year. Tyler stared out the passenger window at strip malls and chain restaurants, the landscape of suburban Phoenix stretching toward mountains that looked purple in the distance. Dad, he said as we pulled into our driveway. Yeah? Are you and Mom getting divorced? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. I turned off the engine and sat with my hands on the steering wheel, gathering words that wouldn't damage him more than silence already had. Why would you ask that? Come on, Dad. I'm not 12. He looked at me with eyes that seemed older than 16. You guys barely talk anymore. When you do, it's like your business partners discussing a project nobody wants to work on. The accuracy of his observation hurt more than anger would have. Marriage goes through phases, Tyler. Your mom and I are working through some things. Are you though? He opened the car door but didn't get out. Because it looks like you're both just waiting for something to end. Inside the house, Rachel was in her office, door closed, the glow of her computer visible under the gap. I knocked softly. "Come in." She sat at her desk surrounded by papers and files, working on something that looked official and important. Her job at the marketing firm required late hours and weekend calls, deadlines that seemed to multiply like rabbits. I'd stopped asking about her projects years ago, not from lack of interest, but from the subtle ways she'd made it clear my questions were interruptions. "How was the game?" she asked without looking up. "Tyler played well. 12 points. 6 rebounds. That's nice." I waited for her to ask more, to show some interest in our son's accomplishments. When she didn't, I felt something harden in my chest. "He asked if we're getting divorced." That got her attention. She turned in her chair, pen still in her hand, eyebrows raised in the expression she used when Tyler brought home a bad grade. "What did you tell him?" "That we're working through some things." She nodded and turned back to her work. "Good answer. Rachel, we need to talk. I'm in the middle of something important, more important than our marriage." The words came out sharper than I intended. She set down her pen and faced me fully, her expression shifting from distraction to something cooler. "Don't be dramatic, Marcus." "Dramatic? Our son thinks we're getting divorced, you missed his game without explanation, and we haven't had a real conversation in weeks. How is that dramatic?" She stood up then, arms crossed, taking the defensive posture I'd learned to recognize as a conversation ender. "You want to have a conversation? Fine. Let's talk about how you come home every day and expect me to be your entertainment committee. How you make these grand gestures like suggesting dinner at a restaurant, then act wounded when I don't fall all over myself with gratitude." Her voice rose with each sentence. "Let's talk about how you've turned into this sad middle-aged man, who thinks marriage means showing up is enough." The words hit like physical blows. I felt my face flush, heat rising from my collar to my hairline. "I've been showing up for 15 years, Rachel. Every day, every game, every school event, every crisis with your mother. Showing up isn't the same as being present," she snapped. "You go through the motions like you're checking boxes. Attend game, check. Ask about her day, check. Suggest date night, check. But you're not actually here, Marcus. You haven't been here for years." The accusation landed somewhere tender, a place I'd been protecting without realizing it. Because part of what she said was true. I had been going through motions following a script I'd written years ago about what a good husband and father looked like. But when had following the script become wrong? "Then tell me how to be here," I said quietly. "Tell me what you need." She laughed then, but not the good kind. The sound was sharp and bitter, like breaking glass. "That's exactly the problem, Marcus. I shouldn't have to tell you. After 15 years you should know. You should want to know." She moved toward the door, clearly done with the conversation. "But here's the thing. I don't think you're capable of it anymore."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"I don't think you even remember how to want something that isn't comfortable and predictable." She paused in the doorway, looking back at me with something that might have been pity. "You'll never find better than me, Marcus. Look at yourself." Then she was gone, leaving me standing in her office, surrounded by the evidence of a life I apparently wasn't part of anymore. I stood there for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The words echoed in the room like sound waves you can't call back. "You'll never find better than me." The confidence in her voice, the casual cruelty of it, the way she delivered it like stating a fact about weather. That night, I walked through our house like a visitor. The living room where we used to watch movies together, now dominated by her laptop and work papers. The kitchen where we'd cooked together on Sunday afternoons, now a place where we grabbed quick meals between obligations. Our bedroom, where intimacy had become a scheduled event that rarely made it onto the calendar. Every room told the story of two people who'd slowly, quietly given up on each other. I found myself in the garage, standing next to my car, a restored 1967 Mustang I'd been working on for 3 years. Rachel called it my midlife crisis, but it was really the opposite. It was the one thing in my life that got better with attention, that responded to care and patience. Under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by tools and spare parts, I felt more myself than I had in months. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner, Jake. "Client dinner tomorrow moved to Thursday. You free for drinks after work instead?" I stared at the message, considering when was the last time I'd gone out for drinks. When was the last time I'd done anything social that wasn't connected to Tyler's schedule or Rachel's obligations? "Sure," I typed back. "Where?" The next evening, I found myself at Murphy's Pub on Camelback Road, a place with dark wood and brass fixtures that felt like stepping into someone else's life. Jake was already there, nursing a beer and scrolling through his phone. At 38, he'd managed to avoid marriage while building a successful career in software development. We'd met at a conference 5 years earlier and discovered we shared the same philosophy about business: do good work, treat people fairly, and don't complicate simple things. "You look like hell," he said when I sat down. "Thank you for that honest assessment. I'm serious. When's the last time you slept?" I ordered a bourbon, something I rarely drank, but felt like the right choice for the conversation I was about to have. "Rachel and I had a fight last night. About everything, nothing. The fact that I exist, apparently." I took a sip of the bourbon and felt it burn in a way that seemed appropriate. "She thinks I've turned into some kind of automaton, going through the motions without actually living." Jake nodded like he'd heard this story before. "What do you think?" "I think I've been doing exactly what I thought I was supposed to do. Be responsible, reliable, present. But apparently, that's not enough anymore. Or maybe it's too much of the same thing." Jake leaned back in his chair, studying me with the directness that made him a good business partner. "When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" The question caught me off guard. I tried to think of a recent example and came up empty. "The car," I said finally. "Working on the Mustang. That's a hobby. I'm talking about something that challenged you, surprised you, made you feel like you were actually living instead of just maintaining." I didn't have an answer. We talked for another hour about business, sports, and the strange alchemy that turns young marriages into old habits. Jake didn't offer advice, just listened in the way men do when they recognize themselves in someone else's story. When I got home, Rachel was asleep, her breathing deep and regular from her side of the bed. I lay awake, thinking about Jake's question: when had I stopped wanting things? When had desire become something I scheduled like oil changes and dental cleanings? The next few weeks passed in a kind of suspended animation. Rachel and I moved around each other with polite efficiency, coordinating Tyler's schedule and household logistics without addressing the larger questions. We were roommates who happened to share a mortgage and a child. I started staying late at the office, not because the work required it, but because home felt like a museum of our former life. I'd grab dinner on the way back, arriving after Rachel had retreated to her office or the bedroom. Tyler would emerge from his room long enough to update me on school or basketball, then disappear back into the private world teenagers create for themselves. One evening in late November, I came home to find Rachel in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a glass of wine in her hand. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a sweater that used to be my favorite. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married, before life carved lines around her eyes and taught her mouth to hold disappointment. "We need to talk," she said. I set down my keys and briefcase, recognizing the tone. This was the conversation we'd been avoiding, the one that would make official what we'd both been thinking. "Okay. I've been thinking about what you said. About telling you how to be present." She took a sip of wine, gathering words. "The thing is, Marcus, I don't want to have to teach you how to want me. I don't want to create a manual for being interested in your own life." I leaned against the opposite counter, the kitchen island between us like a negotiation table. "I do want you," I said. "I've always wanted you." "No, you want the idea of me." You want the comfort and security of being married. But you don't want me, specifically me, as a person who's changing and growing, and sometimes difficult." Her voice was steady, not angry but resigned. "And honestly, I don't want you either. Not anymore." The words should have hurt more than they did. Instead, I felt a strange kind of relief, like finally naming something that had been true for months. "So what happens now?" "I think we should separate. Give ourselves some space to figure out what we actually want instead of what we think we're supposed to want." She set down her wine glass and looked at me directly. "I've already talked to a lawyer. Nothing dramatic, just information about how these things work." "What about Tyler?" "We tell him the truth, that we love him, that this isn't his fault, and that we're going to figure out how to be better parents apart than we were together." I nodded, understanding that this conversation was really a notification, not a negotiation. Rachel had already decided. I was just catching up to a conclusion she'd reached weeks or months ago. "Where will I go?" "I was thinking, you could stay here actually. I found a place in Tempe, closer to work. Tyler can go back and forth." She picked up her wine glass again, her hands steady. "Unless you'd prefer it the other way." "No, that makes sense." I looked around the kitchen, trying to imagine it without her presence, without the careful organization that made our household function. "When?" "After the holidays. No point in ruining Christmas." That night, we slept in the same bed for the last time, though neither of us knew it then. I lay awake listening to her breathe, thinking about 15 years of shared mornings and accumulated habits. The way she always set the coffee maker the night before. How she folded laundry with military precision. The fact that she knew I preferred my eggs over easy and always ordered them that way at restaurants without asking. Small intimacies that would dissolve along with everything else. The holidays passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Tyler seemed to sense something had shifted, but didn't press for details. We exchanged gifts on Christmas morning with the careful politeness of distant relatives, everyone playing their assigned roles in a family drama that had lost its audience. On New Year's Eve, Rachel moved out. I helped her load boxes into a rental truck, carrying pieces of our shared life to a place I'd never see. Tyler supervised with the stoic expression he'd perfected for managing adult dysfunction. When the truck pulled away from our driveway, I stood in the doorway, watching tail lights disappear around the corner, feeling like I was witnessing my own funeral. The house felt enormous with just Tyler and me rattling around in it. I'd never realized how much space two people could fill, until they weren't there to fill it. Rachel had taken half the furniture, but somehow left behind twice as much emptiness. That first week alone, I established new routines. Coffee for one. Dinners that came from containers. Silence that stretched until Tyler came home from school and filled the space with teenage chaos. I threw myself into work, taking on projects that required travel and long hours, anything to avoid the echo chamber my house had become. Jake noticed the change immediately. "You're working too much," he said, one Thursday evening as I prepared to leave the office at 9 o'clock. "Keeping busy." There's a difference between keeping busy and running away. I looked up from my laptop, recognizing the tone of someone who was about to offer unwanted wisdom. "I'm fine." "No, you're not. And that's okay, but hiding in spreadsheets isn't going to solve whatever you're running from." I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. "What would you suggest?" "Live a little. Remember what it feels like to want something besides the next deadline."
That weekend,
I took his advice and drove out to Sedona, 2 hours north through desert that gradually gave way to red rocks and tourist shops. I'd always meant to explore more of Arizona, but had never found the time. Work, Tyler's schedule, Rachel's commitments, the careful choreography of a family life had left little room for spontaneous adventures. I hiked Bell Rock as the sun set, surrounded by couples taking selfies and families navigating trails with strollers. The view from the top stretched across the valley, red stone formations catching the last light like ancient monuments. For the first time in months, I felt something besides obligation and regret, not happiness exactly, but possibility. On the drive home, I called Tyler to let him know I'd be back late. "Having fun?" he asked. "Actually, yeah. I am good. Mom called by the way. Wants to know if you can switch weekends next month." "Sure," I said, then caught myself. "Actually, let me check my calendar and get back to her." It was a small thing, but it felt significant. I was learning to consider my own schedule before accommodating everyone else's. Spring arrived in Phoenix the way it always does, suddenly, and with intensity that makes you understand why people move to the desert. The Mustang project became a weekend ritual, something that required my full attention and rewarded patience with measurable progress. I joined a classic car club, mostly men my age or older, who gathered on Saturday mornings to compare restoration stories and debate engine modifications. It was there I met Elena. She wasn't part of the car club, just a woman who worked at the coffee shop where we gathered after our meetings. Italian-American, probably mid-30s, with dark hair she wore in a ponytail and eyes that suggested she'd learned not to take anything too seriously. She made exceptional espresso and had opinions about everything from carburetor settings to local politics.
"Oh, you're the Mustang guy."
She said. One Saturday morning, as I waited for my order. "Guilty. 1967. You know cars. My father restored a '69 Camaro when I was a kid. I spent more time in his garage than in the house." She handed me my coffee, her fingers briefly touching mine. "How's the project coming?" "Slower than I'd like, faster than I expected." She smiled, and I realized it had been months since a woman had smiled at me, like I'd said something worth hearing. Our conversations started as small talk, and gradually deepened. She'd moved to Phoenix from Chicago 2 years earlier, escaping what she called a life that looked good on paper, but felt like wearing someone else's clothes. She owned the coffee shop with her sister, lived in a small house near downtown, and seemed genuinely interested in things like restored engines and weekend hiking trails. I found myself looking forward to Saturday mornings in ways that had nothing to do with carburetors. "You should ask her out," Jake said when I mentioned Elena during one of our regular lunches. "I'm not ready for that." "When will you be ready?" "When Tyler graduates college. When you're too old to remember what dating feels like." He had a point, but the idea of asking someone on a date felt like learning a foreign language. Rachel and I had been together since our 20s, before online dating and text messaging and all the complicated protocols of modern romance. "I don't even know if she's interested."
Marcus?
"I've seen you rebuild an engine from nothing but spare parts and stubbornness. You can figure out if a woman wants to have dinner with you." The following Saturday, I lingered after the car club meeting, pretending to read messages on my phone, while other customers came and went. Elena moved around the shop with efficient grace, wiping tables and refilling dispensers with the kind of attention to detail that suggested she actually cared about her work. When the last customer left, she looked over at me with raised eyebrows. "Either you're planning to buy another coffee, or you're working up the courage to ask me something." The directness caught me off guard. Rachel had always made communication feel like code breaking, layers of subtext and implication that required careful navigation. Elena seemed to prefer plain English. "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime." "About time," she said, pulling out her phone. "I was starting to think you were just really passionate about caffeine." Our first date was at a small Mexican restaurant in downtown Phoenix. Nothing fancy, but the kind of place where they make the salsa fresh and don't rush you through your meal. Elena arrived wearing a sundress that showed off arms toned from years of lifting coffee equipment, her hair down instead of pulled back. She looked younger than she did behind the counter, less guarded. "I have to admit," she said after we'd ordered, "I wasn't sure you were actually single, divorced. Well, separated. The paperwork is still working its way through the system." "How long?" 15 years married. 6 months separated. She nodded like she was calculating something. What happened? It was the question I'd been dreading and expecting. I'd practiced various versions of the answer, trying to find one that didn't make me sound bitter or pathetic. We grew apart, I said finally. Started treating marriage like a business partnership instead of something we chose every day. That's very diplomatic. You want the undiplomatic version? Always. I took a breath and told her about Rachel's final words, about feeling like I'd been declared inadequate by someone who'd stopped trying years earlier. Elena listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from curiosity to something softer. She sounds scared, she said, when I finished. Scared of admitting she gave up first. It's easier to blame you for not fighting for something she'd already decided wasn't worth saving. Elena sipped her margarita and looked thoughtful. The question is, what do you think? Was she right about you never finding better? The question hung between us like a challenge. I thought about the man Rachel had described, going through motions and checking boxes. There was truth in her assessment, but it wasn't the whole truth. I think I forgot how to want things for myself, I said. But I'm remembering. Elena smiled, and I felt something shift inside my chest, a loosening of muscles I hadn't realized were tight. Good, she said. Because I don't date men who've given up on themselves. We talked until the restaurant started putting chairs on empty tables, covering everything from travel dreams to family histories, to the particular satisfaction of fixing things with your hands. Elena had opinions about everything but held them lightly, willing to be convinced or to agree to disagree. She laughed at my stories about software clients and asked follow-up questions that showed she was actually listening. Walking her to her car, I felt nervous in a way I hadn't since high school. The space between us felt charged with possibility. I had a really good time, she said, keys in her hand but not moving toward the driver's door. Me too. Good enough for a second date. Definitely. She stepped closer, rising on her toes to kiss my cheek. Her lips were warm and soft, and for a moment I caught the scent of her perfume, something light and floral that I'd never smelled before. I'll see you Saturday, she said, then got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot feeling like I'd just discovered fire. The second date was a hike at South Mountain, early enough to beat the heat, but late enough to avoid the serious athletes who conquered peaks before sunrise. Elena wore hiking boots and shorts that showed off legs that suggested she spent time outdoors. She moved up the trail with easy confidence, not racing but not dawdling, keeping up a steady conversation about everything from local politics to childhood pets. At a scenic overlook, we sat on a boulder and shared water and trail mix, the city sprawling below us in all directions. Phoenix from above looked like a circuit board, geometric patterns interrupted by green spaces and mountain ranges. Tell me about your son, she said. I showed her photos on my phone, Tyler in his basketball uniform, Tyler at his last birthday dinner, Tyler trying to look serious in his school portrait. She scrolled through them with genuine interest, asking questions about his interests and personality. He's handling the divorce okay. Better than I expected. I think he saw it coming before I did. I put my phone away and looked out at the view. He asked me once if I was happy. I realized I didn't know how to answer, and now I'm starting to remember what happy feels like. She leaned against my shoulder, a casual gesture that felt monumental. We sat like that for a while, watching hawks circle in thermals, and listening to other hikers navigate the trail below us. Marcus, she said eventually. Yeah, I'm not looking to be anyone's rebound or consolation prize. I turned to look at her, reading the seriousness in her expression. What are you looking for? Someone who chooses me because they want to, not because they're afraid of being alone. Someone who's done mourning their old life, and ready to build a new one. She met my eyes directly. Are you there yet? It was the kind of question that demanded honesty, the kind that could end things before they really started. I thought about Rachel's words, about never finding better, about the man I'd been, and the man I was becoming. I'm getting there, I said. And I want to get there with you. She smiled and kissed me then, a real kiss that tasted like possibility, and made the desert heat feel like nothing at all. Our relationship developed with the careful patience of two people who'd learned not to rush toward forever. Elena had her own schedule and interests, her own friends and commitments. She didn't rearrange her life to accommodate mine, didn't lose herself in the process of being part of a couple. It was refreshing and occasionally frustrating, this independence that reminded me I was choosing to be with her, not defaulting into comfort. Tyler met her 3 months after our first date, a carefully orchestrated introduction over pizza that could have gone wrong in a dozen different ways. Instead, they bonded over basketball statistics and argued good-naturedly about whether deep dish pizza counted as actual pizza. Elena treated him like a person rather than an extension of me, asking about his own interests and opinions rather than performing the stepmother audition I'd been dreading. She's cool, Tyler said after she left, and she makes you laugh. Is that okay with you? Dad, you've been walking around like a ghost for the past 2 years. If she makes you act human again, I'm all for it. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in October, papers signed in a lawyer's office that smelled like leather and disappointment. Rachel looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile in her business suit, and carefully applied makeup. We exchanged custody schedules and asset divisions with the politeness of strangers conducting a transaction. In the parking lot afterward, she lingered by her car while I walked toward mine. Marcus, she called. I turned back, expecting some final piece of business we'd forgotten to address. I heard you're seeing someone. Tyler must have mentioned Elena during one of their dinners. I nodded, waiting to see where this was heading. Is it serious? Getting there. She looked like she wanted to say something more but couldn't find the words. Finally, she got in her car and drove away, leaving me with the strange sensation of closing a book I'd started reading half a lifetime ago. That evening, Elena cooked dinner at her house, a small bungalow near downtown that she'd decorated with vintage furniture and plants that actually thrived under her care. We ate on her back patio under string lights, talking about everything and nothing, the easy conversation of people who'd learned to enjoy each other's company. How was it today? She asked. The final paperwork. Weird, sad, relieving, all at once. And now. I looked around her backyard, at the careful garden she'd planted, and the life she'd built for herself, at the woman who'd chosen to share it with me, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. Now I'm free to choose what comes next. She reached across the table to take my hand, her fingers interweaving with mine in a gesture that felt both natural and electric. Choose me, she said simply. I already have. 6 months later, Elena met Rachel for the first time at one of Tyler's basketball games. I watched from across the gym as they exchanged polite conversation, two women who'd loved the same man in completely different ways. Rachel looked polished and distant, the way she always did at public events. Elena looked relaxed and genuinely interested in the game, cheering when Tyler made a good play and groaning dramatically when the referee made a questionable call. At halftime, Tyler jogged over to where we were sitting, sweaty and grinning, after a particularly good first half. We're up by 12, he announced proudly. You're playing great, Elena said, offering him water from the bottle she'd brought from home. Rachel waved with the careful smile she used for public appearances, the one that said everything was fine and under control. Your mom looks good, Elena said, following his gaze. She's doing okay, new job, new apartment. She seems happier. Tyler took a long drink of water, then looked back at us. You two seem happy too. It was such a simple observation, delivered with the casual wisdom teenagers sometimes possess. Elena squeezed my hand, and I felt that familiar warmth spread through my chest, the feeling of being exactly where I belonged. The second half was even better than the first. Tyler played with the confidence of someone who knew people were watching, not because they had to be there but because they wanted to be. When the final buzzer sounded, and Mountain View had won by 18 points, Elena cheered like she'd been following the team all season. In the parking lot, Rachel approached us as we waited for Tyler to emerge from the locker room. She looked nervous, her hands clasped in front of her like she was giving a presentation to strangers. "Hi," she said to Elena. "I'm Rachel, Tyler's mom. Elena, it's nice to meet you." They shook hands with the careful politeness of diplomats negotiating a treaty. I stood slightly to one side, ready to intervene if the conversation went sideways, but Elena handled the interaction with the same natural grace she brought to everything else. "Tyler speaks very highly of you," Rachel said. "He mentioned you're teaching him to make Italian food. Just basic stuff, pasta, sauce from scratch. He's actually pretty good at it." Elena's smile was genuine, without the calculated warmth that often accompanies awkward introductions. "He talks about you all the time. You've raised a wonderful kid." I watched Rachel's face soften slightly, the compliment hitting exactly the right note. Whatever else had gone wrong between us, we'd both always been proud of Tyler. "Thank you, that means a lot." Rachel glanced at me, then back at Elena. I hope you're both happy." "We are," Elena said simply. "Very happy." Tyler emerged from the locker room then, hair still damp, gym bag slung over his shoulder. He looked between the three of us, with the practiced awareness of someone who'd learned to read adult dynamics early. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," Rachel said, reaching out to ruffle his hair. "Great game, honey. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Mom." He looked at Elena and me. "You guys ready to go celebrate?" "I'm thinking burgers." "Absolutely," Elena said, "but only if you promise to tell me more about that move you made in the third quarter. I've never seen anything like it." Tyler grinned, launching into a detailed explanation of the crossover dribble that had left his defender stumbling. As we walked toward our cars, I caught Rachel watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not jealous exactly, but something more complex. Maybe recognition that this was what contentment looked like when it wasn't forced. That night, after burgers and celebration and dropping Tyler back at his mother's place, Elena and I sat on her back patio drinking wine and listening to the sounds of the city settling into evening. The temperature had finally dropped below 90, making the desert night feel almost cool. "She's not what I expected," Elena said. "Rachel, what did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more dramatic, I guess. Based on your stories, I thought she'd be more confrontational." I considered this, thinking about the woman I'd lived with for 15 years and the stranger she'd become in those final months. She's different now, softer maybe, or maybe I'm seeing her differently. "Do you miss her?" It was a question Elena had never asked directly, though I'd sensed her wondering. I thought about it honestly, trying to separate nostalgia from genuine longing. I miss the idea of her, the version of us that existed before we stopped trying. But do I miss the reality of what we became? No. I reached for her hand across the small table. "I don't want to go backward, Elena. I want to keep moving forward with you." She smiled, the kind of smile that reaches all the way to someone's eyes. Good answer. Was it a test? Everything's a test when you're dating someone getting out of a long marriage. The question is whether you're passing. And am I? With flying colors. We made love that night with the windows open, desert air moving across our skin, as we discovered each other with the patience of people who weren't in any hurry to get anywhere else. Afterward, Elena fell asleep with her head on my chest, her breathing deep and regular. I lay awake for a while, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me from the kitchen counter where Rachel had delivered her verdict to this bed, where a woman chose me not out of habit but out of desire. The business continued to grow that fall. Jake and I landed a contract with a healthcare network that would keep us busy through the following year. I hired 2 more developers and moved us into a larger office space, something I'd been putting off during the uncertainty of the divorce. Elena came to the office warming party, charming clients and employees with the same easy confidence she brought to everything else. "She's good for you," Jake said, watching Elena laugh at something one of our new hires had said. "You seem like yourself again. Actually, you seem better than yourself." "What do you mean?" "The Marcus I met 5 years ago was competent but careful. Risk-averse. This version of you is taking chances, making moves." He sipped his beer and nodded toward Elena. "She's changed your appetite for possibility." He was right. I'd started saying yes to things that would have seemed too complicated or uncertain a year earlier. Business opportunities that required travel, social invitations that pushed me outside my comfort zone. Elena had a theory that comfort was overrated, that growth only happened when you were slightly off balance. "Life's too short to play it safe all the time," she'd say when I hesitated over some new adventure. "What's the worst that could happen?" Usually, the worst that could happen wasn't that bad. We took a weekend trip to San Diego, stayed in a bed and breakfast near the beach, and spent 2 days walking along the coast talking about everything and nothing. We drove to Flagstaff when the leaves were changing, hiking trails that led to views that made the desert feel like another planet entirely. Small adventures that reminded me the world was bigger than the careful boundaries I'd drawn around my life. Tyler spent Christmas Eve with Elena and me, helping her make dinner while I attempted to assemble a bookshelf I'd bought as a gift for her house. We were becoming a family of sorts, not the traditional kind but something that worked for all of us. "This feels right," Elena said as we cleaned up after dinner. Tyler collapsed on the couch watching a movie. "What does?" "This. The way we fit together without having to force anything." I looked around her living room, at the tree we'd decorated together, at Tyler sprawled comfortably on furniture that wasn't his but where he was clearly welcome, at the woman who'd made all of this possible by simply being herself. "It does feel right," I agreed. "Different from what I expected, but right." "What did you expect?" "I thought being happy required more work, more negotiation and compromise and careful management of everyone's feelings." I wrapped my arms around her from behind, feeling her relax into me. "With you it just happens. That's because we're compatible. Actually compatible, not just used to each other." It was a distinction I was still learning to understand. Rachel and I had been compatible once, but somewhere along the way we'd stopped choosing each other and started simply tolerating each other's presence. With Elena, every day felt like a choice we both made actively. On New Year's Eve, almost exactly a year after Rachel had moved out, Elena and I went to a party at Jake's house. Nothing fancy, just good friends, good food, and the kind of conversation that flows easily when people genuinely enjoy each other's company. At midnight, when everyone was kissing and making resolutions, Elena pulled me onto Jake's back deck where we could have a moment alone. "Resolution time," she said, her breath visible in the cold desert air. "I resolved to keep choosing you," I said, pulling her closer. "That's cheating. You're already doing that." She laughed and kissed me, tasting like champagne and possibility. "I resolved to ask you to move in with me." The words hung between us like a question and a statement at once. We'd been spending most nights together anyway, but making it official felt significant. "Is that a resolution or a proposal?" "Both." I thought about my house, the one I'd shared with Rachel, the place where Tyler still had his room but which had never quite felt like home again after she left. I thought about Elena's smaller space, filled with plants and books and evidence of a life lived deliberately. "Yes," I said. To both. Moving in together happened gradually. I kept the house for Tyler's sake, but most of my clothes and personal items migrated to Elena's place over the course of a few weeks. She made space in closets and drawers with the generosity of someone who was genuinely excited to share her life. Tyler approved of the arrangement, partly because Elena was a better cook than either Rachel or I had ever been, and partly because he could see how much happier I'd become. "Dad seems different," I overheard him telling Rachel one evening when she picked him up from Elena's house. More relaxed. Like he's not worried all the time about doing the wrong thing. It was an astute observation from a 17-year-old. I had been worried for years about doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, making choices that would upset the careful balance Rachel and I had created. With Elena, I felt free to be imperfect, to make mistakes, to figure things out as we went along. Spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. Tyler was accepted to Arizona State University, planning to study business with the long-term goal of joining the software company Jake and I had built. Rachel seemed genuinely proud of him, and for the first time since our separation, she looked at me without the guarded expression that had defined our interactions for months. "We did something right," she said after Tyler's graduation ceremony, the four of us standing in the parking lot of Mountain View High School. "We did," I agreed. Elena squeezed my hand, understanding that this moment belonged to Tyler's parents, not to the new relationships we'd built. But later, at the graduation party Elena had insisted on hosting, Rachel pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I owe you an apology," she said. We were standing in Elena's kitchen, away from the celebration happening in the backyard. Through the window, I could see Tyler showing off his diploma to Elena's sister, who'd driven down from Tucson for the party. "For what? For what?" I said that night. "About you never finding better." Rachel looked older than her 42 years, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when we were married. "I was angry and hurt, and I wanted to hurt you back. But I was wrong." "Rachel. No. Let me finish. Elena is lovely. More than lovely. She's exactly what you needed, what you deserve. And watching you with her, seeing how happy you are." She paused, gathering words. "I realized I was trying to keep you small because I was afraid of admitting I'd given up on us first." It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of resentment I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. "We both gave up," I said. "Maybe at different times, but we both stopped trying. You tried longer than I did. I know that now." She looked out the window at the party, at Elena laughing at something Tyler had said. "She makes you better. I made you smaller." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Rachel and I had brought out each other's cautiousness, our tendency to avoid conflict by avoiding connection. Elena brought out my willingness to take chances, to be vulnerable, to risk disappointment for the possibility of joy. "I hope you find someone who makes you better too," I said. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "I'm working on it. The therapist says I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to manage everyone else's happiness." That sounds like good advice. It is. Expensive. But good. We stood there for a moment. Two people who'd shared 15 years and a child, and were finally learning how to be friends instead of adversaries. Outside, Elena was organizing a group photo, Tyler in the center with his diploma, everyone else arranged around him like petals on a flower. "We should get back," Rachel said. "Yeah." But neither of us moved immediately, both recognizing that this conversation was closing something that had been open too long. "Marcus," she said finally. "Thank you. For being a good father. For not making this harder than it had to be. For showing Tyler what it looks like when someone chooses happiness. Thank you for letting him see it." The summer passed in a blur of work and travel, and the lazy satisfaction of a life that felt aligned with itself. Elena and I took Tyler on a trip to the Grand Canyon, before he left for college, 3 days of hiking and camping under stars that seemed impossibly bright. Tyler had inherited his mother's practicality, and his father's stubborn optimism, a combination that would serve him well in whatever he chose to do with his life. On our last night camping, as we sat around a fire that crackled and sparked in the thin mountain air, Tyler looked at Elena and me with the serious expression he got when he was about to say something important. "I want you guys to know I'm okay with this," he said. "With what?" Elena asked. With you being together, with Dad being happy, with the divorce. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. I know some kids get messed up when their parents split, but honestly, you and Mom are both better apart. And Dad, you're like a completely different person with Elena. Different how? I asked. You laugh more. You don't check your phone every 5 minutes. You seem like you actually want to be wherever you are instead of thinking about the next thing you have to do. He looked at Elena. And you make him take chances. The old dad would never have gone camping. He would have found some reason why it wasn't practical. Elena laughed. Your dad's more adventurous than he gives himself credit for. Maybe now, but not before. Tyler stood up, brushing ash from his jeans. I'm going to go call Mom. Let her know we didn't get eaten by bears or anything. After he walked away, Elena and I sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to coals. The desert night was cold even in July, but the warmth between us kept the chill at bay. He's a wise kid, Elena said. He gets that from his mother, and his sense of humor from you. What sense of humor? I'm a very serious software consultant. She laughed, the sound echoing off canyon walls. Right, very serious. That's why you spent an hour this morning, trying to convince that chipmunk to pose for photos. That chipmunk was clearly photogenic. I was just helping him realize his potential. We made love in our tent that night to the sound of wind moving through pine trees, 1,000 miles from the desert heat and the complications of regular life. Afterward, Elena traced patterns on my chest with her fingertip, her touch light and familiar. Marcus, she said softly. I love you. It was the first time either of us had said it, though we'd both been thinking it for weeks. The words settled between us like a gift neither of us had expected, but both of us had been hoping for. I love you too, I said, meaning it in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever meant anything before. Good, she said, settling more comfortably against me. Because I'm planning to keep you for a long time. Tyler left for college in August, his car packed with everything a freshman might need, and several things he definitely wouldn't. Elena and I helped him move into his dorm room, a small space he'd be sharing with a roommate from Tucson who seemed nice enough. Saying goodbye was harder than I'd expected, not because I wasn't ready for him to grow up, but because his leaving marked the end of one phase of our lives and the beginning of another. Take care of each other, he said, hugging us both in the parking lot outside his residence hall. We will, Elena promised. And you take care of yourself, call if you need anything. I will. And Dad, don't turn into a hermit just because I'm not around to make you leave the house. Elena won't let that happen. Good. She's got you trained pretty well. On the drive back to Phoenix, Elena and I talked about what came next. With Tyler at school, and my business running smoothly, we had more freedom than either of us had experienced in years. We could travel, take weekend trips without coordinating schedules, make decisions based on what we wanted rather than what everyone else needed. It's weird, Elena said, as we drove through the desert landscape that was becoming more familiar every day. I feel like we're just getting started, but also like we've been together forever. Is that good or bad? Good. Definitely good. It means we skipped the hard part where you're trying to figure out if you actually like each other. When do we get to the hard part? Maybe we don't. Maybe some relationships are just easy. I thought about this as the miles passed, about the difference between easy and simple, between compatibility and complacency. What Elena and I had felt sustainable in a way my marriage to Rachel never had, built on choice rather than obligation. Back in Phoenix, we settled into a new routine. Elena expanded her coffee shop, opening a second location near the university with a focus on students and young professionals. I took on more interesting projects, saying yes to consulting work that challenged me creatively rather than just paying well. We bought season tickets to the Phoenix Suns, something I'd always wanted to do but had never felt justified in spending money on. The holidays felt different that year. Tyler came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, bringing stories from college and a girlfriend named Sarah who made him laugh in ways that reminded me of how Elena affected me. Rachel joined us for Christmas dinner, an arrangement that might have been awkward but instead felt natural, four adults who cared about the same young man and wanted him to be happy. "This is nice," Rachel said, as we cleaned up after dinner, Tyler and Sarah having disappeared to watch a movie. "Civilized. We're all grown-ups," Elena said, loading dishes into the dishwasher. "Mostly. You know what I mean. A lot of divorced families can't manage this." It was true. We'd managed to create something functional and peaceful, a new kind of family that worked for everyone involved. I caught Elena's eye across the kitchen and saw my own satisfaction reflected there. That night, after everyone had gone home, Elena and I sat on her back patio drinking wine and talking about the future. She'd been accepted to a small business development program that would help her expand the coffee shops. I'd been invited to speak at a technology conference in Seattle, something that both excited and terrified me. "We should go together," she said. "Make a vacation out of it. You don't have to come to a boring software conference. I want to see you in your element. Besides, I've never been to Seattle. It rains a lot. I like rain. We don't get enough of it here." I looked at her in the soft light from the string bulbs she'd hung around the patio, this woman who'd entered my life when I thought it was basically over and shown me how much I hadn't been living. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was interested in things, curious about the world, willing to try experiences that might not work out perfectly. "Elena," I said. "Yeah? Will you marry me?" The words came out before I'd planned them, but they felt right as soon as I'd said them. She set down her wine glass and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Are you proposing?" "I think I am. I don't have a ring or a plan or any of the things you're supposed to have. I don't need a ring or a plan." She moved closer to me on the outdoor couch, taking my hands in hers. "I need to know you're sure. That this isn't about proving something to your ex-wife, or filling some role you think you're supposed to fill. It's not. It's about wanting to choose you every day for the rest of my life. It's about wanting to build something together that's ours, not something we inherited from previous mistakes." I squeezed her hands. "It's about loving you in a way that makes me better than I was alone." She kissed me then, a long soft kiss that tasted like wine and promises. "Yes," she said, against my lips. "Yes, I'll marry you." We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Elena's backyard, surrounded by family and friends who'd watched us build something real from the ashes of what hadn't worked. Tyler walked Elena down the makeshift aisle, grinning like he'd orchestrated the whole thing. Rachel cried during the ceremony, tears that seemed more about joy than loss. Jake served as my best man, delivering a speech about second chances and the courage to start over. Elena's sister flew in from Chicago, bringing stories about their childhood and their father's Camaro that had sparked Elena's love for restoration projects of all kinds. The ceremony was simple, the kind of wedding that focuses on the promises being made, rather than the production surrounding them. We wrote our own vows, speaking honestly about choosing each other not because we had to, but because we wanted to, about building a life based on possibility, rather than obligation. "I promise to keep choosing you," I said, looking into Elena's eyes while our friends and family listened. "Not just today, but every day. When it's easy and when it's hard, when we agree and when we don't, when life surprises us, and when it disappoints us. I promise to see you as you are, not as I think you should be, and to love you for exactly that." Elena's vows were both practical and romantic, promising to share her coffee and her bed and her dreams, to call me on my tendency to overthink, to remind me that life is meant to be lived actively, rather than merely survived. "I promise to keep showing you that you're capable of more joy than you think you deserve," she said, her voice steady and clear, "and to trust you to do the same for me." The reception was held in the same backyard, tables arranged around the space where we'd shared so many quiet evenings. Elena had insisted on making most of the food herself, with help from her sister and a few close friends. Nothing fancy, just good food and good company, and the satisfaction of celebrating something that felt earned rather than expected. Later that evening, as the last guests were leaving, and we were cleaning up paper plates and wine glasses, Rachel approached me at the edge of the patio. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "What's that?" "I was wrong. About you never finding better." She looked toward Elena, who was laughing with her sister while they gathered leftover flowers. "You found exactly what you needed, what you deserved. Thank you for saying that. I needed to say it, for both of us." She hugged me then, the first time we'd embraced since the divorce. "Be happy, Marcus. You've earned it." After she left, Elena and I finished cleaning up, working together with the easy efficiency of people who knew each other's rhythms. When everything was put away, we sat on the steps of her back porch, now our back porch, and looked at the space where we just promised to love each other for the rest of our lives. "No regrets?" Elena asked, leaning against my shoulder. "None. You. Only that we didn't find each other sooner. Maybe we needed to become the people we are before we could recognize each other." She nodded, understanding what I meant. The man who'd married Rachel at 28 wouldn't have been ready for Elena. He'd been too focused on checking boxes and meeting expectations to appreciate someone who colored outside the lines. And Elena at 30 might not have been ready for someone carrying the baggage of a long marriage and a teenage son. "Timing," she said. "It's everything." We sat there for a while longer, watching stars emerge in the desert sky, listening to the sounds of the city settling into night. In the distance, traffic hummed along the highways that connected Phoenix to everywhere else, but we were exactly where we wanted to be. "Mrs. Chen," I said, testing the sound of her new name. "I like it," she said. "It suits me. It suits you perfectly." The honeymoon was a week in Italy, something Elena had always wanted to do, and I'd never considered possible. We rented a small apartment in Florence, spending days wandering through museums and markets, eating food that made Elena close her eyes with pleasure, learning to navigate narrow streets and the rhythms of a culture built around enjoying life rather than enduring it. One afternoon, sitting in a cafe near the Duomo, Elena looked up from her espresso and smiled at me with the expression of someone who'd just realized something important. "What?" I asked. "I was just thinking about what your ex-wife said. About you never finding better. And she was right, in a way. You didn't find better. You found different. You found what you actually needed instead of what you thought you were supposed to want." She reached across the small table to take my hand. And so did I. I thought about this as we walked back to our apartment, through streets that had witnessed centuries of people falling in love, making mistakes, starting over. Elena was right. I hadn't found someone better than Rachel. I'd found someone better for me. Someone whose strengths complemented my weaknesses, whose dreams aligned with mine, whose way of being in the world made me want to be more present, more alive, more myself. That evening, we had dinner at a small restaurant Elena had discovered by wandering off the tourist paths. The owner, a man in his 70s, who'd been running the place for 40 years, served us course after course of food he'd prepared, with the kind of attention that comes from doing something you love. "Beautiful couple," he said in accented English as he brought us dessert. "How long married?" "1 week," Elena said, laughing. "Ah, newlyweds, I can tell. You look at each other like you still have secrets to discover." "We do," I said, squeezing Elena's hand across the table. "Good. Keep some mystery. Marriage dies when you think you know everything." Later, walking through Florence as the city lights reflected in the Arno River, I thought about the old man's words. Rachel and I had stopped being curious about each other years before our marriage ended. We'd settled into assumptions and routines that left no room for growth or surprise. With Elena, every day revealed something new, some facet of her personality or perspective I hadn't noticed before. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, as we paused on a bridge to watch the water flow beneath us. "The difference between knowing someone and thinking you know them. Deep thoughts for a honeymoon. It's a deep kind of love." She kissed me there on the bridge, surrounded by the warm Italian evening and the promise of all the discoveries still to come. 2 years passed, like pages turning in a book I actually wanted to read. Elena's coffee business expanded to 4 locations across the Phoenix metro area, each one reflecting her philosophy that good coffee should bring people together rather than just caffeine them apart. I found myself spending more time at the original shop on Saturday mornings, not because I had nowhere else to be, but because I enjoyed watching Elena work, the way she remembered regular customers' orders and asked about their families. Tyler graduated from Arizona State, with honors and a job offer from a tech company in Austin. The distance felt manageable, close enough for visits, but far enough for him to build his own life. Sarah had graduated with him and accepted a position with the same company, their relationship having developed into something solid and lasting that reminded me of what Elena and I had built together. At Tyler's graduation ceremony, Rachel sat with Elena and me, the 3 of us cheering when his name was called. It struck me how normal this had become, how we'd learned to be a family that worked even after the traditional structure had dissolved. "He looks like you when you were his age," Rachel said as Tyler walked across the stage. "He's got your determination," I replied. "And Elena's sense of adventure," Rachel added, glancing at my wife with what looked like genuine affection. After the ceremony, we took Tyler and Sarah to dinner at a restaurant downtown, the kind of place where they bring you too much food and everyone talks too loudly. Tyler regaled us with stories from his final semester, and Sarah proved she could hold her own in the family dynamic that had evolved among us. "When's the wedding?" Elena asked them over dessert. Tyler and Sarah exchanged the look couples share when they've discussed something but haven't announced it yet. "Next spring," Sarah said. "Nothing big, just family and close friends." "Phoenix or Austin?" Rachel asked. "Actually, we were thinking Sedona. Sarah's never been, and Tyler's been talking about those red rocks since we started dating." I caught Elena's eye across the table, both of us remembering our first trip there together, how those rocks had witnessed something important beginning between us. "Sedona's perfect," Elena said. "Your dad and I can help with whatever you need." The ease of the conversation, the way we'd all settled into roles that felt natural rather than forced, struck me as something worth noting. We weren't the family we'd started out to be, but we were the family we'd chosen to become. Later that evening, Elena and I sat on our back patio, the space having evolved over the years to include a proper dining area and garden beds she'd filled with herbs and vegetables. She was working on her laptop, reviewing financial reports from the coffee shops, while I read a thriller Jake had recommended. "Marcus," she said, without looking up from her screen. "Yeah? I got an offer today." I set down my book, recognizing the tone as one that preceded important news. "What kind of offer?" "A coffee roasting company in Seattle wants to buy the business. All 4 locations, plus they want to hire me to help them expand into other southwestern markets." The words settled between us like a hand grenade with an unclear fuse time. Seattle was 1,000 miles away, in a climate that would require us to own actual winter coats. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. I wanted to talk to you first." She closed the laptop and turned to face me fully. "It's a lot of money, Marcus. Enough that we could do whatever we wanted next." "And what do you want next?" She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the garden where tomatoes were beginning to ripen in the desert heat. "I don't know. I've been thinking about that all day. 5 years ago, I would have said no immediately. Phoenix is home, the business is here, your work is here. But now," she trailed off, then looked at me with the expression I'd learned meant she was about to say something that mattered. "I keep thinking about what Tyler said at graduation," about adventure and taking chances. Are you saying you want to move to Seattle? I'm saying I want us to consider it, together, as a real possibility, not just a fantasy we dismiss because it seems too complicated. I thought about this, turning the idea over in my mind like examining a stone you found on a beach. Seattle meant leaving the desert that had become home, the business I'd built, the routines we'd established. But it also meant possibilities we hadn't considered, adventures we hadn't planned for. What about your family? Your sister? Christina's been talking about moving to Portland for years. She could actually manage that if we were in Seattle. Elena leaned forward, warming to the subject. And your business is mostly remote now anyway. You could consult from anywhere with good internet. What about Tyler? He's in Austin now. Seattle's actually closer than Phoenix. She had answers for my practical objections, which suggested she'd been thinking about this longer than just one day. Tell me what excites you about it, I said. Her face lit up in the way it did when she talked about something that genuinely engaged her imagination. The coffee culture there is incredible, not just the consumption side, but the artisan roasting, the innovation in sustainable practices. I could learn things I'd never figure out staying in Phoenix. She paused, then continued more quietly. And I keep thinking about how we met. You were stuck in patterns that weren't serving you anymore. Maybe I am too. The business is successful, Elena. You've built something remarkable. I have. And selling it would give us the resources to build something even better, or different. Or just to take a year and figure out what we actually want to do with the rest of our lives. The conversation continued late into the evening, covering practical concerns and dream scenarios, worst-case situations and best-case outcomes. By the time we went to bed, we hadn't made a decision, but we'd acknowledged that a decision needed to be made. Over the following weeks, Elena arranged a trip to Seattle to meet with the company making the offer and to explore the city as a potential new home. I used vacation time to join her, curious to see if the Pacific Northwest could feel like home to two people who'd spent years adapting to desert living. Seattle in July was revelation after Phoenix summers. We walked through neighborhoods with actual trees, providing actual shade, visited coffee shops where Elena took notes like a student, and explored markets where vendors sold vegetables that actually grew in the local soil. This is what 65 degrees feels like, Elena said as we walked along the waterfront, both of us wearing jackets in July for the first time in years. I'd forgotten weather could be comfortable. We met with the executives from the roasting company, impressive people who'd done their homework on Elena's business model and seemed genuinely interested in her insights about southwestern markets. They offered her a consulting contract that would require frequent travel but base her in Seattle, along with an acquisition price for the coffee shops that was higher than her initial expectations. "They're serious," she said over dinner at a restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. "This isn't just a courtesy meeting. They really want to make this happen. What do you think?" I think I'm terrified and excited in equal measure, which usually means it's worth doing. We spent the rest of the week exploring Seattle like potential residents rather than tourists. We looked at neighborhoods, visited gyms and grocery stores, drove the commute routes I'd need if I established a local client base. Everything felt foreign, but not unwelcome, different in ways that suggested growth rather than displacement. On our last evening, we had dinner at a restaurant Elena had researched, the kind of place where the chef grows half the ingredients, and the waitstaff can tell you the story behind every dish. The Pacific Northwest approach to food reminded me of Elena's approach to coffee, passionate attention to quality and origin, served with unpretentious competence. I could live here, Elena said as we shared a dessert that involved local berries and herbs I couldn't identify but enjoyed completely. So could I admitted. It feels like a place where we could become the next version of ourselves. Is that what you want? A next version? I thought about the man I'd been when Rachel delivered her verdict about me never finding better. He'd been competent but careful, successful but small in his aspirations. The man sitting across from Elena, in a Seattle restaurant, contemplating a cross-country move for love and adventure, felt like someone I was still getting to know. "Yeah," I said, "I think it is." We flew back to Phoenix with a decision made but not yet announced. Elena accepted the offer contingent on a timeline that would allow us to handle the logistics of relocating our entire lives. I began reaching out to my network, exploring opportunities for remote consulting work that might eventually become a Seattle-based practice. The hardest conversation was with Tyler. "Seattle," he said when we called to tell him about the opportunity. "That's random. It's a good business opportunity for Elena," I explained. "And a chance for both of us to try something new. Are you asking for permission or just letting me know?" "Both, I guess. You'll always have a place with us wherever we are, but we want to know how you feel about it." Tyler was quiet for a moment, processing the information in the thoughtful way he'd inherited from both his parents. "Honestly, I think it sounds cool. Sarah and I have been talking about taking a trip to the Northwest anyway, and it's not like Phoenix is going anywhere." His blessing mattered more than I'd expected. At 22, he was building his own life, but knowing he supported our choice felt like the final piece falling into place. Rachel's reaction was more complex. "Seattle," she repeated when Elena told her over coffee. "That's a big change." "The biggest we've ever made," Elena agreed. "Are you sure about this, leaving everything you've built here?" It was a fair question from someone who'd witnessed Elena's dedication to establishing her business. "I'm sure about wanting to find out what else we might build together," Elena said, "and about not wanting to look back when I'm 70, and wonder what would have happened if we'd been brave enough to try." Rachel nodded, understanding the sentiment even if she wouldn't make the same choice. "When?" she asked. "End of the year. After the holidays. Tyler will be disappointed to miss Christmas here. He's already talking about coming to visit us for New Year's. Apparently Seattle does something special for the celebration." The transition happened faster than expected, and slower than hoped, the way major life changes typically unfold. Elena's business sold in October, the transaction smooth enough to suggest we'd made the right decision. I wrapped up my Phoenix consulting contracts and began working with clients who didn't require face-to-face meetings. Our last Christmas in Phoenix was bittersweet. Dinner with Rachel and Tyler and Sarah, all of us aware that this gathering was ending one chapter and beginning another. Rachel gave Elena a photo album she'd put together, pictures from Tyler's childhood that included Elena in the more recent entries, a visual history of how families can evolve and expand rather than just break apart. "Thank you," Elena said, flipping through pages that told the story of Tyler growing up, of Rachel and me learning to be friends instead of adversaries, of all of us figuring out how to love each other in new ways. "Thank you for making him happy," Rachel replied, nodding toward me. "For making all of us happier, really." The moving truck arrived on a January morning, when the Phoenix temperature was already climbing toward 70 degrees. Elena and I stood in our empty house, rooms echoing with the ghosts of conversations and dinners and quiet evenings that had shaped the past several years. "Any regrets?" I asked. "None," she said, taking my hand. "You? Only that it took us so long to be brave enough to do this." The drive to Seattle took 3 days, Elena and me in her car with the cats, me following in the truck with the belongings we couldn't trust to movers. We stopped in small towns and national parks, ate at roadside diners and slept in motels that reminded us why people usually fly instead of drive when relocating across the country. On the 3rd day, as we crested a hill and saw Seattle's skyline spread out below us with Mount Rainier rising in the distance, Elena pulled over at a scenic overlook. "There it is," she said, getting out of the car to stand at the railing. I joined her, both of us looking at the city that would become home, the place where we'd test whether love could adapt to new climates and different possibilities. "Ready?" I asked. "Ready," she said. 6 months later we were settled in a house in the Ballard neighborhood, within walking distance of the water and the farmer's market Elena visited religiously every Saturday. My consulting practice had evolved to focus on sustainable technology solutions, work that felt more meaningful than the corporate contracts that had paid our Phoenix bills. Elena was traveling frequently for her new job, but seemed energized rather than exhausted by the challenges of helping a growing company expand responsibly. Tyler and Sarah visited in May, timing their trip to coincide with the brief window when Seattle weather justifies all the sacrifices people make to live there. We showed them around the city like proud new residents, taking them to Pike Place Market and ferry rides and hiking trails that offered views of mountains and water in every direction. "This is incredible," Sarah said, as we sat on our back deck, overlooking the garden Elena had already begun establishing. "No wonder you guys seem so happy." "We were happy in Phoenix too," Elena said. "But this feels like happiness with more possibility attached." It was an accurate description. The move hadn't solved problems we didn't have, but it had expanded our sense of what was available to us, what we might become if we kept choosing growth over comfort. That evening, after Tyler and Sarah had gone back to their hotel, Elena and I sat in the same spots, drinking wine, and watching the sun set behind the Olympic Mountains. "Do you ever think about Rachel's prediction?" Elena asked. "About you never finding better?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not in the way she meant it." "How do you think about it now?" I considered the question, trying to find words for something I'd been feeling but hadn't articulated. "I think she was right that I'd never find better than her, in the sense that you can't rank relationships like competing products. But I found different, and different turned out to be exactly what I needed." I reached for Elena's hand, our fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become automatic over the years. "I found someone who helped me remember that life is supposed to be actively chosen, not just passively endured. And I found someone who was ready to choose it with me." We sat in comfortable silence, watching lights come on in houses across the neighborhood, each one representing other couples and families who'd made their own choices about what kind of life they wanted to build together. "Elena," I said eventually. "Yeah, thank you." "For what?" "For proving that starting over doesn't mean settling for less, for showing me that better isn't about comparison, it's about fit." She squeezed my hand and leaned against my shoulder, solid and warm and present in the way that makes everything else feel possible. "Thank you for being worth the move." Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed in the house we'd chosen together in the city we'd moved to together, Elena looked at me with the expression I'd learned meant she was about to say something important. "I love our life," she said simply. "So do I. All of it. The mistakes that brought us together, the courage to keep choosing each other, the willingness to keep growing." She paused, then smiled. "Even the rain. Especially the rain." We'd learned that happiness isn't a destination you reach by following someone else's map. It's a direction you choose, day after day, with whatever person is willing to walk beside you toward something better than what you had before. Rachel had been wrong about me never finding better, but she'd been right about one thing: I needed to look at myself. When I finally did, honestly and without excuses, I discovered someone capable of more joy, more adventure, more love than I'd ever imagined possible. The man who'd sat in that Phoenix kitchen holding divorce papers had been afraid that his best years were behind him. The man who fell asleep next to Elena in our Seattle home knew that the best years are always the ones you're living right now, as long as you're living them with someone who sees your potential instead of just your patterns. Elena stirred beside me as I was drifting off, her voice soft in the darkness. "Marcus, move. Tomorrow let's start planning our next adventure." "What kind of adventure?" "The kind we haven't thought of yet." I smiled, pulling her closer in the bed we'd chosen together, in the house we'd chosen together, in the life we'd chosen together. "I can't wait," I said, and meant it completely. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.